And this is Stijn Postema. Stijn Postema is a journalist with a background in visual culture, and currently he's working on his PhD exploring the field of designalism, and he calls it artistic journalism. Stijn, welcome. What is your PhD about, actually?
Well, you said it. My PhD is about artistic journalism, which basically is the confluence of arts and journalism, the interdisciplinary collaboration of those who work in the arts and those who work in journalism, or those who do both, which is what we also see.
And is that field rich and broad enough to work on a PhD?
Well, at first I didn't know if there was anything going on between journalism and arts. That was a few years ago. But I have a background in journalism as a freelance journalist, and I love to work in visual arts. So I started exploring this, and I found out that there's actually a lot. And historically, both are really intertwined. So you said it in the Middle Ages, you had the village announcer who was actually a theater player.
He was an actor.
A performer, indeed. So, and nowadays, if you look at the news anchor, in a way, this is also a performer. But the style, the aesthetic style that you see the news anchor use is that of is a plain style. It's a kind of an objective form that gives us the impression that what she says or he says is objective in nature.
Okay. There are many names given to this crossover. We call it designalism, you call it artistic journalism. As I said, fact-driven aesthetics is being used. Why did you choose the term artistic journalism?
Yeah, don't look too much behind it. It's about art, it's about journalism. I could have used the term journalistic art because both the terms are in there as well. That term was coined already, so to say, by someone who was studying the field of arts and looked at how journalistic methods were used in this. Alfredo Camarotti is his name. And I thought, okay, I want to be looking at news work, especially, and how every form of journalism is actually also art, a piece of art in a way.
In what way?
It can be evaluated in form, as I just said, in aesthetic form, for example.
Like an artwork?
Yes,
yeah.
But you can also look at the practices that they have very much similarities. We are talking about craftsmanship. So we are talking about creators. And in academia, what we see is that many of our students, they do journalism, they start with the journalism education because they want to create something beautiful. So that's how it starts.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we have to learn them how to do this, but also to think about presenting facts, think about doing right in this world, and well, bring them in contact with journalism ideology, so to say.
I see. Could you say what is the importance of your research? I mean, apart from the fact that you won the title and you can have your PhD, but what is the...
Yeah, titles are not important at all, no. Journalism at the moment faces quite some challenges, and many academics have done the research in this. It's a precarious occupation. There's a lot of...
Yeah.
Yes, precarious. There's a lot of uncertainty, job insecurity. It's a lot of times it's project-based, short-term, and technology created a situation in which there's a lot of people who also present themselves as journalists. So, well, journalism is in constant change, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That constant change means that innovation is necessary and creativity is necessary. So it makes a lot of sense to look at the arts for this because they know how to be creative.
I see.
And at the same time, another thing that you see, there's more interdisciplinary collaboration. So that means that the vocabulary that both disciplines are using, that you have to find out and talk to each other, what do you mean? If you talk about truth, do we mean the same thing? You can mean a factual truth, but for an artist, it can mean a meaningful truth, so to say.
Or an emotional truth.
Or an emotional truth, exactly. And that is something very interesting because academics, they see that journalism is slowly making a kind of an emotional turn. And there's a strong focus at the moment on what is this effective emotional turn in journalism mean for the profession.
Okay. We will go first, we will continue our conversation, but the person I'm going to introduce is staying actually far away from the emotional interpretation, I would say. We're going to watch a pre-recorded interview with someone who started to revolutionize journalism 7 years ago. Eliot Higgins started Bellingcat in 2014. It is an investigative website that uses open source tools to expose the truth behind global news stories. And Bellingcat really has given a boost to citizen journalism, something that Stein mentioned already. More people are doing journalistic work. We can easily do it with our phones. We can do it from behind our computer. This is something that Eliot Higgins tapped into when he started Bellingcat. The results of Bellingcat are stunning, are really stunning. If you think of war crimes in Syria, if you think of the poisoning of Skripal, of Navalny, they found out who the perpetrators were. If you think of the downing of the plane over Ukraine, MH17, they found names, surnames, telephone numbers of the perpetrators. You could say Bellingcat has changed research methods and investigative journalism forever. My first question to Eliot was how he started.
Well, I'd spent about 2 years blogging, and during those 2 years, I'd seen online open source investigation grow as a movement from, just a kind of group of kind of amateurs figuring this stuff out to something that was getting more and more recognized. So I wanted to create a space where people could kind of submit their own open source investigations for publication and also learn how to do open source investigations themselves. So it started off with those very basic ideas, and it's kind of grown ever since then.
Could you indicate some of the projects you're most proud of?
Well, I think, of course, MH17 was, one of the first big Bellingcat investigations, and I think that was important both for Bellingcat and also online open source investigation as a kind of entire field, because I think it brought that to such a broad range of people and demonstrated to people that there's, value in this kind of material, and you can learn out a huge amount of information and also counter kind of disinformation and lies that come from other sources. I think as well, the work we've done on the kind of Russian assassination stuff as well, starting with the Skripal investigation and everything that's involved, kind of unfolded since then, like the discovery of the nerve agent factory in Russia, the Navalny poisoning investigation we did, and these further assassinations that we keep uncovering. Really, that's just been one ongoing investigation, but we've covered an incredible amount, and I think it's had real impact in the world.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was thinking, when you do this kind of research and you find the things that Bellingcat is finding, would you say that on a personal level, it's kind of frustrating that you kind of present the results and then basically nothing changes?
It can be to a certain extent, but you also understand that in certain situations it will take a long time for there to be accountability. I mean, you look at the conflict in Syria that's in its 10th year now, and it's only just starting to see cases in Germany and France that's prosecuting suspects for these chemical weapon attacks that occurred. On the other hand, sometimes you can have results in a lot more quickly. We did an investigation into a video that was shared on social media showing two women and two young children somewhere in Africa being executed by soldiers at a roadside. And by coming together and working with a kind of a community of people to investigate that, after a year, those soldiers were convicted for those murders, and that was the direct response to the investigation that we did. So even though sometimes things can seem like they take a long time to change, sometimes they can be surprisingly rapid.
If you look at the way you do your research, in what kind of ways does what Bellingcat does differ from, let's say, traditional news media?
I mean, I think for one thing, we're very, one of the first organizations to kind of understand the value of, basically user-generated content and how that could be combined with these kind of new sources of information like, Google Maps and Google Street View to, verify events and have this kind of view from a long distance that's actually verifiable. I think as well, unusually, our audience isn't just kind of consumers of the information that we're producing, but sometimes participants in the investigations themselves. So we use that wherever possible. And when you're kind of dealing with, say, a traditional investigative organization, be they working on justice and accountability or journalism, they tend to keep stuff to themselves, while we kind of try and draw in as many people as possible to look at the things that we're looking at. And I think that gives us a certain kind of edge over organizations working on investigative work.
What do you think traditional news media can learn from the Bellingcat approach in finding information or making stories?
Well, I think there's certainly a value there. And I think the issue a lot of traditional media has is unless you're quite a large organization, you can dedicate kind of serious resources to kind of setting up an open source, investigation unit. It can be quite difficult to do. So the news organizations that have been successful doing this, so organizations like the BBC and the New York Times, who have set up teams who are able to, have the budget and the resources and the staff power to actually dedicate their time to it. Doing it as giving it to a journalist as a job to do on their normal day-to-day work means that they aren't going to have time to do the open source investigation, because you have to be engaged with that constantly, because it's constantly changing. There's new information coming out at the time. You have to be someone who consumes a lot of kind of user-generated content, so you can see when stuff is happening and where the interesting kind of stories and potential kind of areas of analysis are emerging from. So with smaller news organizations, what we try and do is team up with them whenever possible and kind of use our open source investigation expertise in combination with their reporting methods. And we found that to be extremely effective on a number of different topics.
And if you would speculate, where do you think our journalism is heading for? If you would say in a period of 5 years, 10 years, will we still have, would Bellingcat be still on the sideline providing information occasionally? Or do you think journalism in itself is changing?
I don't think it's going to change so dramatically that it'll be unrecognizable. I expect there'll be more and more organizations who do kind of adopt open source information in their own investigative work and have a growing understanding of how to do that. I mean, keeping in mind that even a few years ago, it was really just a small number of kind of journalism courses who were teaching about online open source investigations. Yeah. So those are now students who are actually coming into the workforce and becoming part of these organizations. A lot of the kind of early development of this in news organizations was led by taking advantage of the work of kind of amateurs more than kind of anything that was coming from those news organizations. So I think that's going to be one shift. I mean, in Bellingcat's own work, I mean, we're moving now into kind of creating kind of media productions, so documentaries and things like that, to take the very complicated investigations we've done, but present them in a way that's kind of easier for the audience to understand, while still retaining that kind of very high quality. So with the way in which kind of documentary film has been so popular thanks to the streaming services putting money into a whole range of documentaries, I think that might be a new way to kind of present journalism in a way that's kind of engaging to a broader audience. And for Bellingcat, looking at different ways to engage with audiences is very important, because as I said before, our audiences aren't just receiving the information we're putting out, but often part of that. So the bigger audience we have, the more chance there is for us to collaborate with our audience in that way.
And in what way do you think, let's say, artists or designers could use the knowledge and the tools and the technologies that Bellingcat is using?
Well, I've been interested in the work of forensic architecture at Goldsmiths University, because they usually take a very visual approach to the way they kind of present this information. And I think we shouldn't be afraid when we're doing investigative work to look at ways of engaging with audiences in different ways, and different kinds of audiences, because people consume information in a whole range of different ways now, from kind of more obvious stuff like, reading Twitter and, visiting websites and watching TV programs, ways that we might not think about, ways that kind of can be engaging for an audience that we might not necessarily engage with a lot ourselves. So if someone is artistic and they can look at the work that Bellingcat does and think how they could translate that in a different way, how they can present that in a different way, how they can reach their audience in a way that kind of they know will work, then that's something that I think is to be encouraged as much as possible.
Because would you say that that is one of the main differences between Bellingcat and forensic architecture, the kind of visual approach? Because in content, basically what you're doing is pretty much the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've collaborated quite a bit with forensic architecture on investigations where we've kind of provided the kind of video footage and the analysis, and then they've been able to build models and, environments around that that's made them kind of easy to explore and understand. Because often we're dealing with information that's very fragmented. You might have videos and photographs from an airstrike, but there'll be like a dozen videos and photographs from multiple sources from different angles. And we're trying in a way to defragment that to actually say this is part of one moment, not 12 separate things. And by working with the likes of forensic architecture, who can then take that and turn that into, make it part of a three-dimensional model that allows you to explore that and do that in a whole range of different ways, it makes it a lot more accessible to audiences who I think would otherwise, be put off by the kind of lengthy kind of posts that we put out on Bellingcat.
Don't worry, Eliot mentioned forensic architecture. We will see much more about what they're doing later on. Stein, is this approach, Bellingcat, is that the type of artistic journalism, designalism that we're looking for?
Okay, good question. Well, I think this is a very, very interesting start of this event tonight. As you progress through all these kinds of forms of arts and journalism, that there's a kind of a collaboration. And I think what you see here with the Bellingcat work is that journalism is actually open towards change, because Bellingcat is really respected in the Western journalism world especially. They have given a lot of workshops, they are teaching and they are learning journalists how to use open sources. So they collaborate with a lot of media. So what this shows is that journalism is willing to change, and it's not as fixated on remaining the way it is.
Do you think traditional media should embrace their approach more? And what is the problem? Because
yes, well, it's just the way they work it's very interesting. In academia, academics always like to see large movements, and in this case, you would be talking about a mechanical turn in journalism, in which data journalism becomes more and more important. If you go through the evening, you will see more effective forms of journalism. One of the examples is Teatro di Nascosto, which is a form of journalistic theater. And what you see there is, I'm doing a case study on this right now, so I'm very enthusiastic about it. And what you see there is that they dissolve in a society for a longer time to learn not only how people experience the news events, and we're talking about conflict zone situations here, but also they're learning the body language. They are really understanding the meaning of what it is to be in such a situation. Now, recently we have only seen this kind of journalism in the documentary For Sama and such kind of projects. But well, I think journalism has a lot to learn in delving deeper, going into more embedded situations, and it takes longer, it takes more time, but it also will learn journalism to look at, for example, conflict situations in a different way. So this is just one of the aspects that journalism can work with art.
okay, thank you, Stein.